So welcome back to part 2 here of reloading for pistol ammunition, and specifically 9mm, which in essence works across the board for other cartridges such as 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, you name it. And if you are watching this part of the series before part 1, you're going to have absolutely no clue what's going on, because the good old YT will not let me show you guys in one video how to finish one complete cartridge, which in part 1 we got up to decapping, resizing, we seated that new primer, and we belled out the case mouth opening, and that's where we ended part 1. So if this is the first video you have seen of this series, you're going to have to go back to part 1 before watching part 2 here. Enough said. Let's get this going on the third part of this progressive reloading of dropping powder. Now, at least for me and for what I like to do to set up my powder drop is I actually use my Charge Master to make sure I'm dropping the correct amount of powder. And I'll turn this on, I'll let this warm up for a solid 10 to 15 minutes. And I'll make sure I calibrate this. So I'm gonna hit calibration once, hit it twice. It's asking for 150 gram weight. I'm gonna hit this again. It's asking for the next one for 100 total. It is now stable. Hit calibration. And I'll take these off. It says 50. It says 0, so we're good to go there. I'm going to hit 0. Now I'm going to grab just one miscellaneous piece of brass. This hasn't been belled out. It's just a new piece of brass. This isn't that piece of brass that I just belled out. It's just a piece of brass that I just pulled out of that bag that we just cleaned. And this actually has a spent primer. I actually like to do this with a spent primer, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero this out. Once I zero this out, it doesn't really matter what I use because it's non-existent. It's zeroed out. The only thing that we're going to measure here is the powder. So here is the piece of brass that we just got done belling the case mouth opening that we're about to reload. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull this out. And here is that piece of brass that I just zeroed out on the Charge Master. Matter of fact, to make sure that I don't get these two confused, is I put an X on this, especially if you're new. That might be something you might want to do. So this has been zeroed out on my Charge Master, and I'm going to run this through my process to get this set up. As a matter of fact, I have this set up for 5 total grains of unique. As a matter of fact, I am going to righty-tighty push this in to purposely set that off 5 total grains. I'm going to show you how I get this set up. So this isn't belled. I'm just using this to measure the powder. And I'm going to raise the ram. We're going to drop powder into that piece of brass that is zeroed out on my Charge Master, and we're going to weigh that. So let's run over to the Charge Master here and see what that comes up with. And it says 4.2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and this is a process, especially if you're new to the game. I'm going to drop this in. Matter of fact, what I like to do is slam this on a table, make sure there's absolutely nothing in there. Clip this back in, and we're going to lefty-loosey screw this out. Probably something like that. And this is just trial and error. So we're going to try this again. Pull this back out, go back over to the Charge Master and measure it. And I'm going to continue that process until I reach that 5.0. And if you just filled up your powder dispenser, you might have to run this a solid 5 times to make sure there's powder evenly flowing through your powder drop. So let's screw this back out some more, lefty-loosey. Probably something like that. We're going to raise the ram, drop powder in there, and we'll keep on doing this powder drop measure game here until we reach 5.0. It looks like we just overshot it a little bit. So I'm actually going to dump this back in, tap it, make sure it's all out, clip it back in, We went over, so I need to screw this in a righty-tighty, probably something like that. And we're going to keep on going until we reach that 5.0 on the Chargemaster. And right there, my friends, you're good to go. So let's just verify that once more. Looks like once it settled out, it was just a little bit over. There, 5.0. And I'll probably verify this a few times, especially if you just fill this up with powder, to make sure that it is dropping at 5.0. Now, something you're definitely going to want to do is get a game plan down. And I always recommend making an info card that you can put in your ammo box along with your reloaded ammunition. And obviously in this example, at the very top here, you can see I got my bullet preference, the Winchester primers, which I actually use CCI primers. It's just at the time, all primers were non-existent and all that was available was Winchester. So I actually use CCI, but I'm using Winchester in this specific example, so that's all I got. Obviously, we just dropped 5 grains of unique, and now we're about to seat that bullet at a COL. COL is an acronym for cartridge overall length, and we're going to shoot for 1.120. Now, when we seat that bullet, that is our goal, and every single bullet that's seated is not going to be always exactly 1.120. These bullets, especially the tips, are not perfect. Your goal is at 1.120, but one might be perfect, the next one might be a little over, next one might be a little over, next one will be a little under, next one might be perfect. But these tips of the bullets are not exactly perfect. But you're shooting for something around, you can see I got the about mark here, 1.120. So if you're new to the game, definitely get yourself a decent set of calipers. What I like to make sure is that the battery in there is fresh and my calipers are reading true. If you guys have watched my rifle reloading series before, you know I have this one piece of brass that I know for a fact is 1.750 inches long. So just to make sure that I know my calipers and my battery is fresh and the calipers are reading true, looks like we're good to go. So once again, like I mentioned in part 1, this is my specific reloading data for this specific bullet using this specific powder. This is my data, this is not your data. So this is where you're gonna have to do some of your own homework. But we got this set up for 5 grains of unique, and I'm shooting for a COL of 1.120. So let's drop powder into this one piece of brass that's been belled out already in part 1. Clip this into the shell plate. So we are going to dispense 5 grains of unique. I'm going to grab one of these 115 grain round nose. This is where flaring out the case mouth opening is so important. And we are going to seat that bullet. And I'm just going to verify that the cartridge overall length is close to our 1.120. And it's really close, 1.121. You know, the tips of these berry bullets are not exactly perfect. You know, you're shooting for 1.120, and one might be exactly on, and one might be 1.119. The next one might be a little over, a little under. One might be perfect. Your goal is to get this 1.120, and I would say that is definitely close enough. Now remember, a lot of seating dies will crimp the bullet also, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a really big fan of this Lee carbide factory crimp die. It is pretty hard to beat this die in regards to getting the proper crimp on your pistol bullets, and that's why I like to keep an open station for that specific die. Now, these directions here, they clearly state that with a loaded round in the die, turn the adjusting screw until you can feel it touch the case mouth. Then move the cartridge out of the die slightly and screw the adjustment screw in a half a turn for a light crimp and 1 full turn for a heavy crimp. You can adjust for even greater crimp and never have to worry about buckling the case as with conventional crimpers. Now, keep in mind, this is something that you're just going to have to play with, definitely with copper plated bullets and not copper jacketed bullets. And especially when it comes to copper plated bullets, you do not want to rip and see exposed lead on that crimped bullet. As a matter of fact, before I do any of this, I'll actually create a dummy round that has absolutely no primer in it and absolutely no powder in it whatsoever, and I'll create a dummy round to not only measure things like coal, but I will specifically seat this bullet, I will put a crimp on it, and I'll actually even use my bullet puller when I'm initially setting up these dies, and I will pull that bullet out of the dummy round and inspect the crimp on the bullet itself. And it's really important, at least in my opinion, to get this done. Too little crimp, what will happen is the bullet will literally push into the brass casing, which is obviously really bad. And too much crimp will create exponential pressures in your firearms chamber. Both are not good, so keep an eye on that. So just to verify once again that this is reading 1.121, our goal was 120, that's definitely close enough. I'm going to measure this before it is crimped. I'm going to put a nice crimp on here. It's something you definitely need to play around with. I grab this off the floor and I'm going to re-measure this again to make sure that it's still reading 1.121. And I'm physically going to inspect the crimp. And like I said, I would recommend making a dummy round, pulling that bullet out of the casing and inspecting the amount of crimp that is on that bullet. Matter of fact, I will splice in a picture of a dummy round with a pulled bullet showing, in my opinion, the correct amount of crimp on that bullet. Now, one quick measurement that I like to take here is to measure right under the case mouth opening, somewhere right about there. And the measurement that is coming up with is right at 0.377. So I like to see that somewhere around 0.376, 377, at least for 9mm. Looks good. Now, you definitely want to verify the rounds that you're reloading. I personally like to use a case gauge when it comes to pistol ammunition. You can see that this rides just perfect. It's right nice and flush. It's not on the top step. It's running nice and flush. This drops in and out nice and easy. And also, I like to do a barrel plunk test, at least with my SIG 320 here. I like to hear that specific plunk. I'll see if I can get this on the microphone here. So it definitely gets a nice plunk. Also at the bottom of the plunk, I can personally spin that brass in the specific pistol that I'm reloading for. So you can see I'm spinning this. And also, I like to see this, at least with this specific type of barrel, is, like a striker fire type pistol, that this rides just flush, maybe ever so slightly under. And when I say ever so slightly, I mean ever so slightly under, pretty much flush. As a matter of fact, that's something you definitely want to do with a barrel plunk test, depending on the type of firearm that you're reloading for in regards to a pistol. Something like a 1911, You know, when you do your barrel plunk test, you definitely don't want, I'll see if I can zoom in here a little bit better. You definitely don't want the base of that brass to be underneath the top part of your barrel here in this picture example. You know, this and this is just about perfect, and you definitely don't want it to go over. So this is definitely something that you might want to look into, depending if you're loading for something like a Glock, a SIG, or a 1911. This is another example of a Glock barrel when doing the plunk test, and other miscellaneous type barrels. So other than just doing or checking out your ammunition with a case gauge, which in my opinion, at least for a pistol, is important, also do a barrel plunk test. Well, hopefully if you're new to the game, you learned something and you're carrying that information on to the next generation. And who knows, maybe you're a seasoned veteran reloader and you learned a tip or two, maybe. But hopefully you are carrying this information on to the next generation, my friends, because that is truly how we are going to protect our rights. Well, this specifically is for 9mm, but like I said, part one, this information pretty much carries on to other pistol caliber flavors, something like 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, other than that small primer, what's it a blue moon note that I mentioned in part one. It's pretty much all the same thing. It's just different bullets, different powders, and different load data. That's pretty much it. And just to make it crystal clear, this is my load data. This isn't your load data. This is me reloading. This is not you reloading. Get that out of the way. If you feel like you learned something, continue to scratch my back, and I'll continue to scratch your back with this amazing content. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Hit that notification bell. Become a Patreon. It helps out more than you know. And I will see you guys in the next video.